A week ago today, President Joe Biden signed an executive order extending various protections to LGBTQIA Americans. In that EO, he addressed what he called various equality issues, including discriminatory legislative attacks against LGBTQI plus children and families, directing key agencies to protect families and children, preventing so-called conversion therapy, safeguarding health care and programs designed to prevent youth suicide, supporting LGBTQI plus children and families by launching a new initiative to protect foster youth, prevent homelessness, and improve access to federal programs. Of course, he signed that during Pride Month, which is in June. Joining us right now to discuss what impact will this have on African Americans is Dr. Cleo Manago. He's the chief advisor for Black Men's Xchange. Carolyn Wysinger, the board president of San Francisco Pride. Victoria Kirby, the deputy executive director of the National Black Justice Coalition. And Ranzeno Frazier. He was the first African-American leader of the LGBT Community Center for Charlotte's Charlotte's LGBT Community Center, and of course also was elected as its board of trustees chair. Glad to have all four of you here. And so when we talk about this executive order, one of the things that I've talked to many folks in the past about is that when we talk about black folks who are LGBTQ, now you're talking about folks who are dealing with these issues from a different perspective than those who are white, those who are non-black. And over the years, I've had just a number of black folks who talk about the issues that they still have when it comes to these sort of initiatives that don't necessarily impact black folks in the same way in terms of being able to offer a level of assistance and support. So just want to get your thoughts on this and what is being discussed, what is being said among African Americans when it comes to these efforts to combat laws and other things that target LGBTQ. Anyone can start.
Yes, thank you so much for having me in the National Black Justice Coalition on this important conversation. We nerd out on regulatory policy. So, the moment the executive order dropped, I was scrolling, reading, and trying to figure out what the impact was going to be on Black LGBTQ plus and same gender loving people. And I have to tell you, I was actually surprised how thoughtful the administration was in trying to think about and name the places of intersection that's important. One of the real key areas for that is in data collection, where right now sexual orientation and gender identity isn't collected regularly in government forms. But on top of that, the piece that really harms our efforts in the Black community is the data isn't disaggregated on the back end with the data that allows us to look at the disparities on homelessness and youth suicide, senior aging challenges that are very specific and disproportionate to the Black LGBTQ plus and same gender loving community. And being able to have access to that data will help us to better be able to serve our population and to help prevent some of the numbers that have long plagued our community much worse than the white LGBTQ plus community. There's a whole much more we can dig into, but I think it was one of the biggest shifts that I've seen in government and looking at executive orders and administrative action in a way that doesn't just put LGBTQ people over here and ignores the reality that bucket includes a whole lot of diversity within it, including Black folks.
Yeah, I would say that the big test, and I agree with Victoria, and I'll be very honest, when something like this happens, I go directly to the National Black Justice Coalition to see what they have to say about it, right? Because we see this all the time in our communities. A lot of these bills, a lot of these efforts are done in a way that it kind of stays at the top level of LGBTQ life. When we talk about housing insecurity, we don't get all the way down into homelessness. We don't talk about how many of our Black trans folks are the majority of our homeless population. And a lot of times it does take for us to be working actually on the local level, because of course our local leaders are the ones who see it most directly, right? So, for instance, here in San Francisco, Mayor Lyndon Breed actually has started an initiative where she plans on ending trans homelessness in the next 5 years. And we know that in San Francisco, the highest population of homeless folks is our Black trans community. And so for me, I'm going to be more interested in looking how things like homelessness, things about suicide, things that we as Black folks know specifically affect us. A lot of times, again, these efforts, they'll deal with wealth gaps. They'll deal with people having to pay their fair share of taxes when their partner dies, things that are very high-level, wealthy things that we have to be very honest. A lot of the white LGBTQ folks have ascended to that level of wealth, and we don't really think about what's going on with our Black and brown people down on the ground. So for me, I'm excited to see, like Victoria said, that they dig in the weeds, and they are attempting to dig a bit more in the weeds to the issues that specifically affect us. But I'm definitely going to look and see how it's implemented, because even if it says us in the document, how is it going to be implemented to make sure that it gets down to us?
So I know for me, I take a lot of looks at the society that I live in and that I grew up in. As a Black community, we were not always welcoming, and we were not always open to the LGBTQI community. But I can say here in Mecklenburg County, in the city of Charlotte, working with C.W. Williams as a medical case manager, I see the different numbers of homelessness. I see the numbers of HIV and AIDS rising within the Black community, and there's not a stable place for them to go to feel comfortable, to express themselves, and also get that help. Like the young lady said, coming into this, a lot of us African Americans don't have that wealth, doesn't have that knowledge of what to do with our significant others, or what to do when we get to that level. So there has to be a place, there has to be a plan, there has to be production of something for us to excel on and to do, not only in the LGBTQI community, but within our Black community ourselves. We have to help us uplift us so that we can be better.
I think it's important to look at the fact that the white gay community, who runs the LGBTQ politic and community, has had lots of wins. It's won having same-sex marriage be legal in this country. It's one in terms of being a community that went from ground zero for HIV transmission to ground zero for HIV prevention in terms of being so successful. And now they successfully made the transgender issue part of everything you talk about, from soup to puppies. The issue of transgender might come up because they have put it central to the conversation in this country. But the reason I mention those successes is because the HIV problem in the Black community is still disproportionate. Black people have not benefited from these white gay community wins. I also looked at the executive order and looked closely, and I'm not surprised. I mean, ever since they got Barney Frank in Congress, and when they started having successes on HIV and getting this country to pay attention to them, they've been very, very, very successful at moving themselves into mainstream and becoming one of the most powerful communities in this country. But Black people overall have not benefited from that. And the HIV industry is one of the great ways in which to measure that, because we're still back in 1990 stats. So I think it's important to look at the fact that this is good in terms of the fact that this community, including white gays, was once an extremely oppressed community, being killed in the military, losing their jobs, being harassed by the police. There was some very similar phenomena happening between gay identified or homosexual people in this country and Black people, but white gays stopped that. I think Black people can learn from this, because homosexuals are supposedly 10% of the population. When it comes to people in communities, Black people are supposedly 12 to 13%. We could have these kind of wins too. There could be an executive order on advancing the defense, protection, life, and autonomy of African American or Black individuals, and not just gays, queers, and the people identify as such getting this executive order. It shows the power of Joe Biden as well. If he did have the imagination enough to come up with an executive order himself to make it difficult to kill people and get away with it. Black people, in this instance, who keep on getting killed, and on occasion, the murderer is found guilty. On most times, they're not. So I'll close this by saying and reiterating that Black people can learn from this, learn the power of focus, of steadfastness, of being on the same page, on holding people in power accountable, like we did not do when Barack Obama was president. as a result of the white gay machine, he was put on the cover of Newsweek as the first gay president. That's how powerful they are. And they're supposedly a minority group. Black people, if we stayed focused, if we had critical analysis and made sure that our issues were on the table and that we showed up and that we were more unified, because I won't get into that on this show except to say that the same gender loving bi trans community is one of the most ununified communities in this country, which is why we can't have enough focus to make sure that we have to benefit what the white gay community has a benefit from. We have some internal work to do. That's a residual effect of having been slaves, et cetera, and all the unresolved trauma that is what was exacerbated when people was messing with folks of being sexual and gender minorities as well. But all that to say is that this is nice on a structural level, predominantly for white gays, but like with HIV, like with same-sex marriage and other things that they've put on the table to win, Black folks have not won in terms of equity.
So I'll put this question to the four of you. Do you have, to Cleo's point, do you have the type of partnerships, do you have the type of efforts working together among Black folks within this movement?
That's a great question. And I think there are two parts to it, right? So one piece, just pulling a little bit on what Dr. Cleo said, and just gotta say, when we talk about same gender loving, that term was coined by Dr. Cleo. So gotta give credit where credit's due. I want to talk about this piece on regulatory policy and the reality that whether it's slavery, what happened afterwards, where we are today, the Black community, we got to get sharper on some of these opportunities, because President Biden did do an executive order on day one related to racial equity, also did one on voting, also did one on dealing with police accountability. But we also, part of the process is we as Black people have to then go to regulations.gov and put in our comments for what we want the government to then do. And then they do it, or they hear feedback from folks who disagree and don't want them to do it a particular way. And so, there were less than 1,000 comments that came in on an executive order that was about restructuring the entire federal government to deal with rooting out inequities based on race. And what I realized coming from being in an organization that straddles the LGBTQ movement and racial justice movements, was that there was a lot less knowledge in Black space. And there's an opportunity for NBJC and other organizations to do more educating, to make sure we have these opportunities, we hitting home runs and getting everything that they owe us. You know what I mean? Getting some of those changes put in. We're getting some of it in some of these subsequent executive orders that are coming out. But it's not everything that we need. And part of it is on us, going to that larger point, getting in deep community with all the various grassroots Black, LGBTQ+, same gender loving groups across the country, so that we can unite under, a Black power agenda that we can push through. That's good, not just for our intersection of the Black community, but the whole Black community. When we say, when the most marginalized among us get free, everybody get free, we mean that, right? And so if we mean it, it means we have to move like that. And we have an opportunity to do it different. But that window's going to close, because the segment before was just talking about what's going to happen after these midterms, and then what's going to happen with the presidential election in 2024. And so, yes, I hope our people show up and show out, and we have some urgency to move quickly to get the things that we can get done now, including a lot of money. Sometimes we'll think about executive orders as, that's temporary, but those dollars aren't. If you get those grants in and secure the funds where they need to go. But our people have to know about those opportunities, have to be educated about the opportunities, have to know about the process. But
has that happened? Has that gathering happened? And if it hasn't, why?
We gather folks across the country from Black.
Hold on. Okay, hold up. Like, who's talking? I think Victoria, I think you were talking.
I was just naming that every year we gather during the nation's largest LGBTQ activist conference for an event called the Black Institute. We have grassroots folks. Last year, we had folks from 32 different states plus District of Columbia, which one day will be a state. And we had a couple folks from other countries too, where we have an opportunity. That's how me and Carolyn know each other. We also have our Good Trouble network of Black LGBTQ plus and same gender loving elected officials from across the country that gather to make sure that, we're on one accord and that there's some support. They have some model policies and mentorship to help move along the process, because it's hard to be an only. Do we need to have more of it and need to ensure more people are able to come and be brought in? Of course. The pandemic definitely has put a wrench in some of what we wanted to do in person, but we're going to continue to identify opportunities for us to bring our folks together, if it's via virtual spaces or in person, if it's during the Congressional Black Caucus weekend, whatever opportunities we have. We want to make sure that where Black LGBTQ plus folks are gathered, that we're in the midst.
I think it was Carolyn, then it was Cleo. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I was going to actually go to something that Dr. Cleo said about, how we don't harness that power. And Victoria kind of hinted on it as well. We are not in the deep collective as we should be. I mean, there are so many people across this nation that are doing this work, and most of us don't know it. My good friend Imani Rupert Gordon is a Black woman who is the first Black woman, I believe, executive director of the National Center of Lesbian Rights. So her job is literally every day to be filing these briefs and suing for these laws. And most people don't know that there's a Black woman that's doing that. One of the most powerful Black trans women here in the Bay Area is Aria Saeed, who's running the Transgender Cultural District, the only city demanded cultural district, trans cultural district in the nation. But we don't have these conversations, even though we do, like Victoria said, we go to the Good Trouble Network when we're together at Equality, when we're at Victory, we're all these places, we make sure that we get together, but we don't have the collective thing like they had back in, what was that, 69 or wherever they had the Black caucus meeting. We don't have that thing. And I think that yes, and Black LGBTQ folks, because we are so marginalized in all of these places, we need desperately to get together, because we need a better bench of elected officials. I mean, I'm running for office here in El Cerrito. I believe I'll be one of 5 Black stud, butch, whatever you want to call us today, people who are actually in elected office. We don't have a bench of elected officials to actually, make sure we're implementing these laws. We have a broader list of legislative aides and people who are working for elected officials, but we don't know who they are. We don't have a good collective of who the grassroots workers are. So we need that so we can harness that power. We don't have an HRC or anything such as that, and we need that to make sure that we're putting those ideas together and being on the same page. Cleo. If we have that, we can get on the road to it.
Cleo?
Well, MPJC is interested in for sure helping to build towards that, and we want anyone who's open to doing the work with us to hit me up. You can go to mbjc.org, fill out the contact form. As Deputy Executive Director, that's a big part of my portfolio, and the work that we want to be able to grow out is going to take some time. But for folks who are listening to this, watching this, and you say you're ready for a change, you're ready for a different space, ready to kick it back to some of the collectiveness that we once had, the time is now. Like I said, the clock is running out. So, hopefully we're going to get it reset, right? Get some more time. But in the midst, we do need to act urgently.
Cleo, go.
Roland, your initial question was, if I heard it correctly, was, are we unified? Are we working together?
Yes.
The answer is no. LGBTQ, et cetera, not the SGL part, but the LGBTQ part is ran by white folks. And white folks tend to put Black people in power or in front of the camera who they feel comfortable with, who are typically in very intimate relationships, including personal interests with them. And they look Black because they are Black, but they are very much involved or indoctrinated into whiteness. And for example, the majority of the people in this country who have name recognition in the press, in the media, who are gay identified, majority of them are spending most of the time in white culture, in white context, and they have hardly anything to say in demonstrative ways to the Black community, and they're not about Black power, at least in terms of how they articulate anything at all. It's all about LGBTQ, as if whites need them, because whites don't. They're quite powerful, and they take good care of that community. But I think it's important to reiterate that it's not unified. It's fragmented. White racism and blackface has helped to fragment it. A lot of the meetings that are put together under LGBTQ, again, are facilitated by white accommodating Black people who are not affirming of Black people. As a matter of fact, back in the day of HIV Holocaust, the majority of people that got resources to serve Black people were Black men who wouldn't touch Black people with a 10-foot pole. And it didn't work, which is why it was such a disaster. We need Black people who love Black people in charge of this work, so people can have resonance and feel attracted beyond bougie people or people who are not connected to the Black community, having little events that only attract them. Because as I said earlier in this conversation, a lot of these things that have a Black person involved, from marriage to everything, it does not trickle down into transformation, healing, and focus on Black people. And we find different ways to be disconnected all the time. So getting back to your question, it's no, but it needs to become yes. Because if we don't come together and get beyond class, bougie, white accommodations behavior, and unlearn anti-Black impulses, we're going to stay in the state of crisis and have this conversation again about how we should come together, but now looking at why we don't.
Ranzeno.
If you don't look at why there's resistance to coming together, it's not going to happen.
Ranzeno.
I think you brought up a good point.
Hold on one second, Ranzeno.
Okay.
I learned from experience. I was the first Black chair for the LGBT Center of Charlotte. And as long as I was doing things that they felt were needed and wanted, it was okay. But the moment I tried to step outside and do things differently that not only affected my culture and my generation, they did not like it. I made a mistake that wasn't even my fault. And they took one editor that did not like me. And when I say he was pink and red in the face, he did everything he could to get me taken from that place. So anything I wanted to get unity on, anything I wanted to get us equal rights on, anything I wanted to work with city officials. And we do have one young lady, her name is Lawana Mayfield. She's an elected official here in Mecklenburg County. I'm sorry, she's running for re-election now, that stood up for our rights. But at the same time, he did everything that he could to get me out of that place. And now it's at a place to where there is no LGBT Center of Charlotte. And I feel that at this point, as a Black community, like you said, we're not on one page, but we need to be on one page. The same way we get together for Atlanta Pride, DC Pride, Florida Pride, all these Black prides. Let's not get together and have a conference about what we can do to elevate and move forward in this current climate that we're in. Because as a Black culture, it's more than clubs, it's more than parties, it's more than drinking. We're representing a nation of people that have worked hard, that have put a lot of weight and a lot of issues on their back for us to not get pulled back 10 steps. We need to be a lot more effective and efficient with the things that we're knowledgeable about, the things that we are surrounding ourselves with, and also holding the elected officials, both in DC, anywhere really in hierarchy, accountable for what they do. Don't just use us as a platform or a sentence for your campaign or your slogan. Actually make it work. Actually do it. Actually meet with us, talk with us so that we are heard. We do have a voice and an opinion on what is going on.
All right, folks.
Well, anti-Blackness and self-hate and white accommodationist tendencies is a problem in the so-called LGBTQ community. And that's why this community could only witness this executive order, like they've witnessed HIV progress, and not be a part of it, because we have yet to have enough people who really care about Black people fearlessly in leadership in these contexts, particularly when it comes to policy and important decision-making.
All right, folks, we will leave it there. I certainly appreciate having all of you on the show regarding this very issue. Thank you so very much. Look forward to chatting with you again. All right, folks, back to our Roland Mark Unfiltered video in just one moment.
Love our new Alexa.
It's a Buick.
Yeah, Alexa.
Buick.
Alexa.
It's a Buick.
It's an Alexa. It's a Buick. It's an Alexa. Coach, that's a Buick. That's an Alexa.
The Buick Enclave with available Alexa built in.
Folks, Black Star Network is here.
Oh, no punches! I'm real revolutionary right now. Black power!
Support this man, Black media. He makes sure that our stories are told.
Thank you for being the voice of Black America, Roland.
Stay Black. I love y'all. All momentum we have now
We have to keep this going.
The video looks phenomenal.
See, there's a difference between Black Star Network and Black-owned media and something like CNN.
You can't be Black-owned media and be scared.
It's time to be smart.
Bring your eyeballs home.
You dig?